Hey, we are back with Ruth, and we are going to go into my favorite verses as we go through Ruth 1, verses 8 through 18. And I know you're like, Nikki, you've been going like verse by verse, and now we're going to do 10 verses in one. Yes, today's devotion might be a little bit longer, but I promise it is worth it. Here we have Naomi basically deciding that she is forced to go back to Judah. And if you want to know why she's forced, you're going to have to listen to the other devotions. But she has to go, and she has her two daughter-in-laws with her. And here we see in verse 8 where she basically looks at them on the road back to Judah and says, "Go back to your mother's homes, and may the Lord reward you for your kindness to your husbands and to me. And may the Lord bless you with the security of another marriage." Both of these have her daughter-in-laws, Orpah and Ruth, cling to her and say, "No, we don't want to go. We want to go with you to your people." And Naomi looks at them and says, "Why should you go with me? Can I still give birth to other sons who could grow up to be your husbands? No, my daughters, return to your parents for home, for I am too old to marry again. And even if it were possible and I were to get married tonight and bear sons, then what? Would you seriously wait for them to grow up and refuse to marry anybody else?" Now, this is not Naomi being a little bit creepy going, like that whole, Twilight imprinting. If you love Twilight like me, you'll get that joke. But it's not like there's a baby and they're like, "Oh, that's the one I'm going to marry," right? It's not her being creepy. This is actually based on law, Hebrew law. We can find it in Deuteronomy 25 verses 5 through 10, where God actually established that if a man were to pass away without providing a male heir, that the younger brother or older brother would have to marry that woman, and that first male heir would belong to the dead brother. Why did God establish this? Well, inheritance, land, all had to be passed on to a male heir. So this actually took care of the women in society by making sure that they had a male heir and were able to keep a hold of the land and the inheritance that their dead husband had. This was a way for God to take care of the widows. However, could you imagine being around that dinner table and your brother brings home a wife and knowing that death at an early age was very possible during this time, and being like, "Okay, I have a chance I could have to marry her," and being like, looking at your brother being like, let's try again next time. Let's bring home somebody different, right? I want to make sure that I'm attracted to this woman too. This should be a group decision around the dinner table if this is who you're going to marry. And there had to be some humorful conversations at that moment, but that was just the way the law was at the time. And so that is why Naomi is saying, if I were to go get married tonight and have a male son, would you really wait for them to be grown up to marry them? Of course you wouldn't. So go back to your people. Now, we see here that we have to understand that if they were to go with her to Judah, that most likely they would have no prospects anyway. You remember what we talked about was the Hebrew men were not supposed to marry Canaanite women, and Moabites were Canaanites. And so therefore, Naomi broke the law by marrying off her sons to these two women. So if she brought these two women with her to Judah, most likely most Hebrew men wouldn't want to marry them anyway. They had so much more prospects by actually returning to their own people and their own families and trying to start over from there than they had actually following her. Verse 14 says, "And again they wept together, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye." Orpah walked the sensible choice. She said, "You know what? You are right. I am way more likely to have a life if I go back to my own people." But Ruth clung tightly to Naomi. "Look," Naomi said to her, "your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. You should do the same." Orpah made the sensible choice. But there's still love for her mother-in-law. This isn't her going, "See you later." No, there is tears and there's love and there's kisses. This is a hard goodbye. But at the same time, we are not talking about Orpah 2,000 years later. We are only talking about Ruth. And I want to pause here because there's something that God is teaching me through this story right now. And that is that God's best does not always exist within the sensible choice. Can I say that again? God's best does not always line up with a sensible choice. We live life based on analytics, based on the trends, on what should happen. And a lot of times we make decisions based on that. But can I tell you that God does not always work within this sensible choice, within the best analytics and the trends on where things are going? Why? Because if he follows through with that, then oftentimes the praise or the glory of that decision falls not in God, but on the fact that, yeah, that was supposed to happen. That was the trend. That's where it was going. But God's stories exist when the sensible choice or the road that is less traveled, when we walk that road and great things happen. Why? Because God gets the glory. And I say all this because perhaps God could be trying to get you just to talk to one person about him. And you're like, Lord, but I could do so much better and I could follow this trend and I could get more people or more followers. And God's like, I'm not about you getting more followers. I'm about this one person that I want you to go after because I care about the one. And so all of that to say, here Ruth actually decides to take the unsensible choice and to follow after Naomi. And the verse actually says that Ruth goes against it and she actually clings to her. The Hebrew word for clings is devak, which means in Genesis 2, it's used there too. And it actually talks about the bond between Adam and Eve. It's like a marriage bond. So when she says Ruth clings to her mother-in-law, Naomi, it's as if she is marrying herself to her. Verse 16, but Ruth replied to Naomi, don't ask me to leave you and turn back. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord punish me severely if I allow anything but death to separate us. This is my favorite verse. One of my favorite verses in all of the scriptures. This is a powerhouse statement as basically Ruth is confessing her undying love to Naomi, but there's more here. She is confessing her love to Naomi, saying that wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Wherever you die, I will die. Your people are my people. But then she says, and your God will be my God. This is huge. You see, Ruth is a Moabite, which believes in many gods. And all of a sudden, she is confessing her undying devotion to the one true Hebrew God. By the way, this Hebrew God, the God that we serve, is a jealous God. In other words, he does not allow you to serve him and also serve dozens of other gods. We believe, he is the one true God. I am so grateful for that God is the one true God. And here Ruth is saying, I am going to worship the Hebrew God, the one true God of the universe, and I am basically understanding that means I have to deny all the other gods that I have learned to worship my entire life. Do you understand what's happening in Ruth's in her life right at this moment? She is giving her life to God. She is becoming a follower of God. And this is an amazing statement that you would think that Naomi would celebrate. The fact that this daughter-in-law of hers that believed in many gods, and sure the Hebrew God could fit into that belief, is now saying, I am denying everything and I am following after your God, Naomi. The one true God. I'm giving my life over to him. This would be something to celebrate. You see, she is going to walk into Judah, believing the same that these Hebrew people do. But at the same time, she is going to understand, and she has to understand, that she is going to be welcomed into Judah like a bucket of KFC at a fine dining vegetarian restaurant. Like she is not going to be welcomed into Judah, right? She is a Moabite woman. The God told them not to associate with the Moabites. And yet, Naomi is going to be bringing her in. And maybe in Naomi's own heart, she thought, I don't want to bring her in because she's going to be proof that I really walked away from God. But at the same time, Ruth has given her life over to God. She is now an adopted child into God's family. And this is what is interesting to me. Although Ruth is saying, for better or for worse, my life is yours and my life is God's. And it would be something to celebrate as she is confessing this true act of self-sacrifice and denying all that she's known for what is to come. Verse 18 says, when Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go, she said nothing more. She said nothing more. She didn't acknowledge this beautiful powerhouse statement. She didn't acknowledge the fact that Ruth had just given her life over to God. She said nothing more. And I want to see the difference and the contrast between these two lives right now. Ruth is sacrificing everything to go after God. And Naomi has basically gone after the world for so many years that she's living in bitterness towards God. And we're going to see what God does in both of these women's hearts through the next couple verses. Because although Naomi is very angry with the Lord, God is not done with her. And we're going to see him pursue her even in the next verse. But that is for next time. I hope you glean something off of these verses, because this is some of my favorite stories in the Bible. And I think we have something to learn from both Ruth and Naomi, whether you have just walked with God for a little bit of time or whether you have been walking with him for years. There's things that we can pull out of this and apply to our lives today. Until next time, I pray that God continues to speak to you through these verses.